morning, good afternoon, good evening. We've got people joining us from all over the world today, and welcome into one of our last programs of 2021 here at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you've been joining us live or on YouTube over the last year, 5 years, however long you've been joining us, we are all about bringing innovation and class around the world. And I want to say a huge thank you to all our teachers, all our families for joining us. It's been unprecedented times these last years and a half, of course. And so it's so thrilling that you've had the chance to partner with us in showcasing such amazing people and places around the globe. It's really special for me personally, and I want to say a huge thank you, as this is my last program of the year. So thank you guys for joining for this. Now, many of you that have been joining us over the last couple of years will know that one of our biggest partners is the amazing team at Hearts on the Ice. If you haven't checked out heartsontheice.com, do that after this broadcast. Do it right now. Do it whenever you want. It's a great program. It's a fantastic series. We have hosted over 30 broadcasts with them over the last 2 years, and this is the brainchild of Sunniva Sorby and Hilda Fallenstrom. They spent a long period of time at Bumsaboo, a remote trapper's cabin in Svalbard, one of the most remote, forbidding, and yet amazing places on this planet, to draw attention to climate change, to draw attention to all the amazing stuff happening up in the Arctic. And so over the last couple of months, they've been bringing in a series of incredible special guests with us. I'm really excited to give them a chance to speak with us today. But first, I wanted to bring in Sunniva live and Hilda via a phone to tell us a little bit about their story. Hi, from Norway. Welcome in.
Hey, and here's Hilda. We have to love the fact that we have technology to do this. This would have never been possible at Bumsaboo. No way.
We've had programs with you, but usually with a phone, the connection's difficult because you were about as high on this planet as people typically go ever, and not even many people then. Wait, you guys are outnumbered by polar bears up there, right?
Like you're so right, Jesse. We were there for 19 months, and we're in our third year with you, and we could not be happier because during the time at Bumsaboo, we reached over 100,000 youth from around the world. And this is our last call in December too. Or for this year. And we're really, really happy to have Canada Goose as our education partner, because their tagline could not be more appropriate: working to keep the planet cold and people warm. Hilda and I were at COP26 in Scotland, and we spoke on a panel. The title was "The Importance of Polar Education to Understand Climate Change." And, we can tell you as firsthand observers that the planet is warming, and the Arctic is in a pretty perilous state right now, and polar bears are deeply affected. So we're wanting to shine a light on that this month, and are super happy to have Polar Bears International too, in the mix with a lot of great content. So, and I'm going to have Hilda share a quick something, okay? Because
perfect. Yeah, Hilda, come on in.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Lovely to see all of you. So I'm in the mainland of Norway, and Sunniva is back in Vancouver Island. And I just wanted to say how cool it is to be having a topic like polar bears, and having experts along with us today. Because for Sunniva and I, having polar bears around us for 19 months and more than 100 polar bear encounters, being sort of immersed in their area and just observing how they were living and how they moved around. And we had 6 months in total of those 19. It was complete dark. So we had a lot of polar bears to see us during the dark season. And this now in December, this is when the polar bear mom usually go into den. So if they are giving birth during Christmas, they need to be in a den by now. And last December, we had so little snow up in the high Arctic, and we were very worried about the polar bear moms. And sure enough, the polar bear mom that we were following, the Norwegian Polar Institute could tell us that she was actually, her body temperature from the cold around her neck, they could tell that she was colder last December, and were sure if she could bring alive cubs out from the den this winter. And the reason why she was colder was because of the snow layer was thinner last year because of less snow. So it's all climate and warming temperatures and less sea ice, and polar bears really don't have one challenge. They have several challenges. So I really look forward to listen to the experts from Polar Bear International, all of you kids and all of you.
Thanks, Hilda.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Hey, Jesse, the reason she's on the phone, and I have to say this, is because this is our favorite topic and our favorite month, really, is that we had 28 classrooms signed up, right?
We literally reached the limit of what StreamYard can have live on camera, so that's why we had to do it this way, which is a good problem to have, I think. Yes.
And so I'm super happy to bring in Louise and Stephanie, who are both volunteering for and sponsored by Polar Bears International. Thank you two so much for joining, and I'm going to hand it over to you two now.
Thank you so much, Sunniva, Hilda. What a pleasure to have you as always. And again, last week we had the chance to join with Norwegian Polar Institute's Jan Ors. That was an amazing program. It's still on our YouTube channel. But one of the big questions we got in that was the importance of sea ice, why it's so important for bears. Today, to talk a little bit about. So, Stephanie, Louise, thank you so much for joining us today, and take us away. Whoever wants to share first, or however you guys want to set it up, we're good to go.
Great, thank you. So I am gonna share my screen, which you should be seeing right now. Is that good, Jesse?
We've got it, and it's beautiful. Couldn't be better.
Okay, great. So hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here today and to be with Sunniva and Hilda and Jesse and my colleague Stephanie Penk to talk to you about polar bears and sea ice in a warming world. So my name is Louise Archer. I'm a postdoc researcher and I study polar bear energetics at the University of Toronto. Right, so there's no polar bears in Toronto. We find polar bears in the circumpolar north, and this is the area of the Arctic Ocean that encompasses 5 countries that hold polar bears. So that's the USA, so in Alaska, Canada, Russia, Greenland, and Norway. And we find polar bears in this area primarily because that's where sea ice forms, right? So polar bears are really tightly linked to sea ice, which forms when the surface of the Arctic waters become cold enough and you start to get ice developing, and that allows the polar bears to move out onto the sea ice. So essentially to walk on these frozen Arctic waters. And they're so tightly linked to the sea ice that their Latin name, Ursus maritimus, actually means the sea bear, right? So it's really, really important for polar bears to have access to sea ice. And in particular, we find polar bears located at different areas of sea ice in particular. So polar bears need an Arctic food chain to support them. And we find this Arctic food chain most productive in areas where the ice is thin enough and the water is shallow enough, the light can penetrate through the ice. And that allows for energy to flow through right up to the top of the food chain, which is the polar bear. So we find these bears distributed closer to coastal areas where the water is shallow enough for light to penetrate through. So those are the kind of areas where we tend to find polar bears. And they're really well adapted to this sea ice habitat, right? So it looks like a hard place to live, but the bears are really, really well able to live and cope in this Arctic environment. So they have small ears, a small tail, which helps retain heat. They have this really incredible sense of smell. So in the Arctic, when it gets really dark in the wintertime, not so much light, they're still able to find prey using their sense of smell. They have large furry paws, which stop them slipping on the ice and keep them warm. Their claws as well help them to grip as they move across the ice and catch their prey. They have thick fur, a double layer of fur, which keeps them warm and helps them camouflage in with that snow and ice environment. And polar bears also grow to be very large with lots of body fat. So that also keeps them warm in that really cold environment where the temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees and polar bears are still fine in that environment. And so, like I said, the sea ice is super important to the bears. So they'll use it to move and to travel. So polar bears actually prefer to move across on top of the sea ice. Although they're good swimmers, it's actually quite energetically costly for them to swim. So they'll tend to avoid it if possible. And you'll see them jumping between flows of ice to avoid getting wet. And the bears will also use the ice to breed. So males follow the footsteps of females that they leave in the ice, and they smell the scent of the females from these footsteps, and it allows them to locate a mate. And we even see some females will use the ice to build a den and to have cubs. But most importantly, bears use the ice to hunt seals. And this is the one thing that they really require sea ice to do. because polar bears actually hunt seals from the surface of the ice. They use that ice as a platform. So seals are much faster than bears. They'll tend to escape from a bear in the water, but when the seals come up to take a breath, a bear can wait by the breathing hole, and that's when they have most success at catching a seal. So right from the top of the ice. And similarly, a bear will try and catch a seal that is basking on top of the ice rather than underneath. So it's really important that bears have this platform to hunt their preferred prey. But the sea ice isn't the same across the environment of the bears. And right down in the most southern distribution of polar bears, so down in this red circled area, this is the seasonal sea ice region, and this means that the ice can melt during warmer seasons. So we divide polar bears into 19 subpopulations, and we find some of the most southerly populations actually experience different ice conditions to those located further north. And these are the populations that Stephanie and I study the most extensively. And what actually happens when the sea ice melts, right? So in the summertime, the temperature warms a lot, and right down at the south of their range, the polar bears here, they lose access to the ice in the summer when it melts. So in this map on the right-hand side, where the area is circled in red, that area loses all of the ice in the summertime. So Western Hudson Bay loses all sea ice as it melts when the temperature is warm, and that means the polar bears are forced to move onto the land, right? So the ice melts, they no longer have access to that platform to hunt seals. So they'll move onto land and they'll wait for the ice to freeze up when it gets cold enough in the winter time. And so that's where we get to see these polar bears move onto land, waiting for the ice to refreeze. And this happens in the Western Hudson Bay population of polar bears that we study. And when they're on land, the bears are using their stored body fat as a source of energy. So they're not hunting, they don't have access to seals. Like I say, they're not so good at hunting seals in water. So they'll just wait for the ice to get cold, or for the temperatures to get cold enough and that ice to freeze up again. So they'll wait patiently on land for that time. But what we've seen with climate warming is there's less and less sea ice available for the polar bears year on year. So the ice is melting earlier with warmer temperatures, and it refreezes later in the year as well. So polar bears are losing around 13% ice on average per decade. And this means they're spending longer on land and relying on all that stored body fat as an energy source for longer periods on land. So we're studying how the energy of the bears determines just how long they can spend on the land. So as that period on ice hunting gets shorter and that period in the summertime on land gets longer, what does this mean for bears in terms of energy? Because energy really determines all of these important processes for polar bears that are key to survival and reproduction. So they need energy to cover metabolism, growth, reproduction, activity, keeping themselves warm. And they have to do all this without access to seals when that ice melts in the summer. So knowing about how bears use energy will tell us a little bit about how long they can survive when they don't have access to ice. So now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Stephanie Penk, who's going to talk a little bit more about energetics and polar bears and what this can tell us.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Louise. And Stephanie, I'll bring you in. There you go.
Okay.
Thanks for that fantastic first part of the chat today. Stephanie, your screen's up, so you're good to go whenever you'd like.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Louise. And so we're just going to roll right along talking about energetics. So polar bear energy budgets. Bears can lose about 1 kilogram of body mass per day while they're fasting on land to pay for all those energetic needs Louise was talking about. Now, in the 80s, the average fast for that Western Hudson Bay population was 107 days. If we fast forward to 2005 to 2015, that increased over 20 days. So we're sitting at 130 days for the average fast then. So what does that mean for survival and reproduction in polar bears? Well, when we have fat bears in good body condition, they're able to cover those energy costs for survival for much longer than skinny polar bears. Now, even the fat bears have a limit of how many days they can go, though. And body condition also directly impacts the number of cubs that a mom can reproduce and her ability to produce milk to continue to provide for those cubs and keep them alive. So to summarize, here's the problem. Climate change is leading to reduced sea ice extent, which means less access to seal prey. Those earlier ice breakups and later freeze-ups means that bears have less time hunting seals on ice and more time fasting on shore. And so that leads to reduced energy stores in individuals, which can increase mortality of the individual through starvation, and also of their dependent young if females can't produce milk to feed them. Females with less fat stores also have fewer and smaller cubs, and smaller cubs have higher mortality. So this increase in mortality of adults and cubs and decrease in cub reproduction ultimately leads to population level declines because we have more deaths than births. And now energy is the key link between changing environmental conditions and individual survival and reproduction. So if we understand how polar bears gain energy and use energy, we can understand how survival and reproduction will respond under these never before seen ice conditions predicted for the future. So dynamic energy budget models are what we use to understand this link. So to develop a polar bear energy budget model, we have to understand energy needs and energy uses. And essentially, that's just using math to calorie count for polar bears. So we need to understand how much incoming energy polar bears have. So we know that when they're fasting, that's 0. And how much energy they need to perform biological processes associated with their life cycle, like basal metabolic rate, activity, so moving, and growth and reproduction. Understanding how that energy is gained and used means that we can predict the responses of those individuals when there's lots of food or when there's low food. So what the heck is a dynamic energy budget model? Well, they're grounded in physics and they use Einstein's law of the conservation of mass and energy. So the main point is that energy can be moved from place to place or transformed into different forms, but it can never be created or destroyed. So we know that 2 values have to be the same from the beginning and the end. So it might be a little confusing, but it's essentially counting calories, where that energy is going and where it's being spent. So look at yourself. We might have an apple that is 70 calories of potential energy. Now, some of that energy is lost through the heat of digestion when you eat it, and also some is just not usable, so that's lost. So when we eat that apple, we've, let's say, added 30 calories to our body, but we're also spending calories. So even when you're sleeping, you burn energy to keep your cells alive, your heart pumping. That is your basal metabolic rate, and it depends on your weight, your height, and your age, and your sex. And now we can use a mathematical model to predict how much you would spend on that based on those metrics. So let's say you spend 1,000 calories on your basal metabolic rate. And now maybe you went for a walk. So that also burns calories. And that depends on how much you weigh, how fast you went on that walk, and the distance you went. So let's say 500 calories for your walk. And then when we put this all together, we see that you actually burned more calories than you gained. And since we know energy can't be destroyed or created, that missing energy must have come from the fat stores already contained in your body. So that's exactly what we're doing with dynamic energy budget models, just with a little more fancy math. So we actually use dynamic energy budget models for polar bears to predict when populations could be affected by changing ice dynamics in each region. So we looked at predictions for sea ice when greenhouse gas emissions are moderately mitigated, so what the Paris Agreement would do, versus if we continue business as usual, which would lead to a 4 degrees Celsius increase. And we found that even that difference of 2 degrees led to very different predictions of when polar bears would be impacted. So we had many more populations in the business as usual that were affected in reproduction and survival, and much more likely. And so we know that there is a difference in their future based on what we do. So some things we can do to make sure that they have a more promising future, some solutions for polar bears, are to vote and speak up. So vote with the climate in mind. Let your leaders know that you want action on greenhouse gas emissions to help the sea ice. We can promote clean transportation, like shifts to electrical public transportation or walking and biking more. We also need to move our infrastructure to support an energy shift to renewables. At the same time, we need to become more energy efficient to build a better future by using less energy all around, no matter what the source. And finally, we just need to talk about it. We know that these issues are occurring, and talking about it and what we can do about it will help us to move forward. So thank you all very much for listening, and we look forward to taking your questions.
Fantastic. Dr. Penk, Dr. Archer, thank you guys. That was an amazing program. You both had this little clip or picture of the polar bear leaping out to grab the seal. I put this in the chat in StreamYard and on YouTube. It's from The Hunt by BBC. It is like the most amazing footage of any animal eating any animal ever. Like, it's just nothing that comes close to it. I encourage everyone to watch it when they're done, like 30 seconds. Well worth it. Guys, we have so many classes. This is great. On YouTube, I think there's already been like 55 questions asked on YouTube, which is a good problem to have again. Stephanie and Louise, if you both want to come out of screen share so you can see us again, feel free to do that. But we're going to dive into our live classes first. And again, we'll bring in Sunniva and Hilda to talk about the Hearts and the Ice perspective throughout the broadcast. But Mr. Markwick joining us in Sudbury, you guys come on in first and take us away. Hey, guys.
Hi there. I've got Kirsty here, and she'd like to ask a question.
Perfect.
Out of all animals to research, why did you choose polar bears?
Well, for me, I actually started researching bats, and bats are, yeah, I know, completely other end, very tiny little animal. But what's so neat about bats is that they're all about energy as well, because they're hibernating. And so we need to know that they have enough energy to survive the time when they go into a cave. And so when the polar bear opportunity came up, it was a big parallel. It was all about energy, just from grams to kilograms. So
I like that. See, that's a fairly unique story for us. This is fantastic. I love when scientists start off in something completely different and end up down the road. There's some like small linkage that like to kids, they never go that way. But like, this is the essence of science. It's so neat. By the way, because we've got two speakers today, if there are questions that both of you know how to answer, this one, Louise, I'll come to you in just 2 seconds. We can alternate one and one, and then that saves you a little bit. So Louise, why are you in polar bears? What's going on?
That's funny hearing Steph's background, because I actually started out studying fish. So again, really far away from polar bears. But I was super interested in how we can use math and kind of novel ways to understand how animals are going to respond to climate change. And because polar bears are really at the edge of experiencing climate change impacts, they're one of the best species to study to actually understand how other species are going to respond down the line, right? Because we're seeing changes happen in polar bears first. So we learn a lot about the entire world and other ecosystems from studying polar bears. So I think that's really what got me into studying polar bears from fish.
Sort of an indicator species of sorts, or like the canary in the pond. I love the math element. So for me, I loved math until it became the alphabet, in which case I completely, when it was X plus Z to the Y, I was gone. But see, kids, if you stick with math, you can end up helping conserve polar bears, which is pretty epic. So I encourage you to do that. McGill, let's go to Thunder Bay. Mr. McGill's class, grade 6s, just unmute your mic, and I'll bring you in for our next question. All our live classes, I promise I will come to you. No need to rush on the chat. We're coming to everybody. Hey guys, unmute and you're all good to go. Yes, I love the enthusiasm. You guys are crazy. It's great. But coming up, you got to unmute your mic still, okay? Yeah, in fact, all our teachers, unmute your mics. We can only hear you when we bring you in anyway, so it's much easier that way. Okay. There we go. Yep, come on, unmute the mic and you're all set. I'm going to come back to you guys. So teachers, we'll keep going around community D1. If you guys want to come on in, Ms. Mahoney's group, welcome in, guys. Hi, and Charlotte.
Hi. What's up? My question is, how many polar bears do you still out there and not in captivity?
All right, Louise, I'm going to leave this one to you, and Stephanie, you can take our next one after this.
Perfect. So we don't have an exact number on the amount of polar bears there are in the wild. We think it's somewhere between 20 to 26,000. And the reason we don't know is because they're really hard to study in the wild, right? So up north, it's dark in the winter, very hard to survey polar bears out on the ice. So we're starting to get a little bit more information about some of the populations we know less about, particularly in Russia. But for now, our best estimate is between 20 to 26,000 polar bears.
Yeah. And we said this at the beginning of the broadcast. I'm going to bring back in Sunniva for a second. How many did you guys run into over your time in the cabin?
We had over 100 encounters during the 19 months. And I just wanted to share this, it's a shameless plug, but our book is out. And you see that picture?
Yeah.
That's one of the bears that we were following. And because of COVID, Jon Norris, who we had as a speaker on Friday, wasn't able to get out into the field to determine whether or not it had given birth. And we found it with 2 cubs at a distance. But what an amazing experience to witness that. But they are both beautiful and dangerous.
They certainly get the world's largest land carnivore. The only animal that you don't really want to run into. I think a lot of people are afraid of sharks, and sharks really, if you go swimming with them, they're going to swim away. They're off the horizon. But crocodiles and polar bears, you don't walk up to a polar bear. That doesn't end well for you. Hilda, do you have anything to add?
No, it's a magnificent animal, and we are what we are worried about is the rising temperature and more rain coming down and less snow and less sea ice. But it's, as Sunniva said, it's absolutely amazing to see them out there in the wild.
They're such a special animal. I told this when we did Jan's presentation last week. For our Canadian classes, head to Churchill, the polar bear capital of the world. You can see these right in Canada. You can go there on a commercial flight. You don't need to be in a trapper's cabin. If you'd like to follow Sunniva and Hilda's footsteps, you can. It's a very cool gig to do.
And stay tuned, because we're going to do a Canadian Arctic expedition next year. So, and I read about a company that's using an electric buggy now to go, which I think is a step in the right direction. So,
yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your perspective. That was great, guys. And we're going to head to Chris Hadfield School, Milton, right down the road from me here. So come on in, Chris Hadfield. Hi,
guys. My question is that are polar bears really white?
Are they really white, Stephanie? What's going on? Maybe this is like
a good question.
Thing.
Yes, so they're not. You were on to something there. Their skin is actually black, and then their hair is translucent. So there is no color, and it's picking up on the white of their surroundings. So yeah, great question. Not actually white. It's
there
tricky.
You go. It's one of those urban legends that gets confirmed. We've had a few this year, so there you go. Great job, guys. By the way, I love the obligatory Raptors shirt of one of the students in the GTA every single time. Denise Massey's class, welcome in Sevens. Welcome in Emeryville. Hi, guys.
Go ahead. I have a question.
Yeah.
How much do smaller polar bears energy? How much do they burn?
Ooh, Louise. Or Stephanie, or if you want to do this.
So how much they burn depends on a few different things. It depends on the time of the year, right? So at certain times of the year, they'll be moving around more and burning more energy. So when they're out in the ice and they're hunting, they're burning a lot more. When they're on land, they're burning a lot less. They're just resting. And like you say, it also depends on the size. We know that the smaller bears tend to burn less than larger bears because their body size is smaller, so their metabolic rate costs less. So in terms of energy, what's a good way to think about it is how much seals they would need to eat to cover their costs. Yeah. So we know that a polar bear on average would need to eat a seal around every 5 days to keep them going. Wow. So about a seal, just over a seal a week, a good sized seal will keep a polar bear ticking over. So that's kind of around the energy that they need.
Yeah. Very cool, guys. I want to highlight, too, on the energy note for me, one of the things that all our students can do, think about animals of any kind around the world, and you'll notice that as they get further and further north, you get animals that are more and more spherical because it keeps all that heat in. You get skinnier things, skinnier people even, along the equator just to sort of dissipate that heat versus keep that heat in. I just always thought that was one of my very favorite ways of thinking about different wildlife around the globe. Let's head to North Hollywood, California, where we all wish we were, to Mr. Pettix's class. Come on in, guys. Hey.
Hi. So my question is, my name is Malachi, and I have a question: are polar bears safe when the ice melts and they are on land?
So are they safe when they're on land? Well, they're safe because there's no predators of polar bears on land. But in terms of they don't have access to food when they're on land. So their biggest problem is how long they can be on land. And that's what Louise and I work on determining is just how long can a polar bear go when they're on land and they're not getting those high energy seals that they like to eat. How long can they survive off their energy stores? And so that's really their only worry is how long until the ice comes back. And so that's what keeps them unsafe is waiting for that ice.
Yeah. Again, it's such a unique animal because they really do rely on this ephemeral habitat, which is pretty unique in the world. Most things have a place that they live year round, but it's constantly a shifting landscape around them. And that's why they're such a great bellwether for climate change. They're such an evocative creature for it. And so, frankly, they're why this program is so popular. And I'm so glad we're getting these detailed questions to talk about it today. Live classes, we are going to come back to you all in just a minute. Mr. McGill's class, unmute your mic. If you want to type question in the chat, I'd love to make sure that you're good to go when we do come to you guys in a minute. But I'm going to take a few from our YouTube friends for the next couple of seconds. So Mr. Hancock's class has asked 197 questions in our chat today, as always. They are joining us in Georgetown, Ontario today. And Milo wants to know how you can tell the age of a polar bear. Louise.
That's a great question. It's kind of an interesting answer. So how you can age a polar bear is by removing a small tooth behind their canines. They have these teeth there that actually show rings, and you can count the number of rings, which we call growth rings, and this tells us how old the polar bears are. So it's kind of like reading the rings on a tree. We can use that to tell just how old a polar bear is. And they don't really miss these teeth because they're just very small. They don't really use them for anything. So it's a pretty handy way of aging a polar bear is by reading their teeth.
Okay, so I have to ask this as a follow-up. Is there a way to do it if you don't have the option of tranquilizing them and taking the tooth out? If you just see it from the shore and you're like, I don't want to get closer to that thing, is it like a size thing or is it just winging it?
You can tell a little bit by size. They're pretty hard to tell without some context, but a little bit by size from the younger bears. But mostly the best way to be absolutely certain is by their teeth. But then if you have a bear that's tagged, right, you can then go back to it. And once you know the original age when they were tagged, you can then go to your database and see just how many years it was since you tagged them and get an estimate of the bear's age.
Fantastic. All right, couple more from YouTube. Miss Rasika's class, welcome in. Are polar bears omnivores like the other types of bears, black and brown? Stephanie.
Right. So polar bears are actually the only totally carnivorous bear species in the world. And we actually like to call them lipivores because lipid is fat, and they really just like to eat fat. If you have a bear who's not starving, when it gets a seal, it leaves the skin, it leaves the muscle, it leaves the bones. It just takes the fat and moves on. But that's all they're eating.
Yeah, I love this. They're one of the only animals in the world that's like this, where when they're completely sated otherwise, they pick and choose. Other bears do this with salmon. They'll just eat the eggs in some cases. We've got whales, they'll just eat the lower jaw and tongue of other whales. We're one of the only creatures that does this fairly regularly, so it's really unique to hear it in polar bears as well. Awesome, guys. Let's head back to our live classes. We've got a whole bunch more coming in on YouTube. I'll take as many as I can. But Mr. Markrick, come on back in and take us away.
Hi, my name is... Speak up next one.
Hi, my name is Landon. I want to know if you ever seen a polar bear.
Have you ever seen a polar bear? Is that it, Mr. Markrick?
No, you said you would like to know if you've ever seen a polar bear kill or hunt a seal.
Oh, ever seen a hunt in person? Either of you? I'm curious.
So I've never seen a hunt in person, but I've seen from a distance in Churchill a polar bear that seemed to be scavenging on the shoreline. So it seemed like it had found something that washed up that it was eating out in the shoreline, but I've never seen a hunt. I think they're pretty rare.
Yeah. No, I haven't been lucky enough to. I just missed one. Apparently, while I was up in Churchill, some people out on the buggy saw one still hunting a seal. So it was just laying there and then waiting for the seal to get close enough. But it's also that, are they sleeping? Are they hunting? You got to be careful, because it looks very similar.
Sunova, you were saying in the background, what have you guys ever seen a hunt?
Mhm.
Well, we came across two dead seals that had freshly hunted, and one thing that's super unusual, but they're seeing it more actively now, is we did come upon several dead reindeer that were hunted by the polar bear. And we came within minutes. We actually, I think, scared it off with the snowmobile, because we saw blood out on the ice, and we couldn't understand what that was. And so there's seeing that more and more, that their lack of access to the seals, they'll kill the reindeer. And we saw one area where there were 5 dead reindeer actually.
Wow. See, there was a footage of this not too long ago, I guess a few weeks ago, that was it made the news all over the world of watching this hunt. And it's wild. On BBC series, we've seen them try and hunt walrus, which is an animal bigger than bear,
Let me know if you want to say anything.
As those easy food sources disappear, I guess increasingly they're going to diverse and potentially dangerous ones. Hilda, do you have anything to add?
No, it's just to see how they are trying to adapt, especially up in Svalbard. And we actually, as Sunniva said, we were working with Etra, and he had recently killed that, or he actually ran away from the carcass of a reindeer. So, but what we and the scientists think is that the polar bear don't have any time enough to adapt to a species on land. And as you both experts said, the polar bear needs seals because of the fat. It's not enough to eat a reindeer. Stephanie and Louise.
Yeah.
No, that's spot on. Yeah.
Well, they will try to eat anything that they can get their paws on, but it's not enough. Exactly.
Right. Well, this is one of the things too that we like to harp on in climate change presentations, is that sometimes we get questions, hasn't climate changed before? Yes, it has. The difference now is the speed of it. So if you have tens of millions of years to adapt, it's very different, because you can develop those new food sources, you can learn to acclimatize to new environments. But if this is happening in a few hundred years, it's way beyond the scale of most animals to be able to account for that. And so that's why all our effort is so collectively important. Ladies, let's go to Community D1 again. Back to Charlotte. Unmute your mic and come on in for another question. Hey, guys.
How many polar bears die a year?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Who wants to field the impossible question?
So that's actually something that is really hard to know how many polar bears die. They tend to die mostly out on the sea ice. And it seems like their bodies after they die are maybe eaten by other bears, they're scavenged by other animals. So it's pretty unusual to find the dead bodies of bears. So we're not exactly sure how many bears die out on the ice a year. So Steph, I don't know if you want to add to that, or...
Well, we do have estimates for survival rates. So an annual survival for adult polar bears in the southern Beaufort Sea is actually over 90%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very high. Once they reach adulthood, bears are great at surviving historically. Obviously, we're seeing some changes to that number. But yeah, they're up around 94%. So, I mean, if you looked at the population size, you could maybe get an estimate of how many are dying a year. But
we're going to head to fields in a minute for this great youth follow. So Paul's class wants to know how many babies they have a year. And this is a question we got in Jan's presentation the other week. So how many babies when a polar bear does have babies, and what's the survival rate of them? You talked about the fact that when they become an adult, they're really good at surviving. What about when they're really young? Stephanie, actually, do you want to follow up with that?
Yeah, sure. So again, as we kind of touched on with the energetics, it really depends on how healthy a female polar bear is, how fat she is, because really, really fat females in good body condition can actually have triplet cubs and can actually keep them alive if they're good hunters. Now we're seeing in the Western Hudson Bay, they used to have triplets in the 80s. And we're seeing that we're really only getting singletons, maybe some twins. But when they come back ashore they actually stick with their moms for 2.5 years. So you can see, so often they might emerge from the den with twins, but then when they come back to shore with yearlings, there's only one left. So we do have a pretty high mortality rate in that first year, sometimes as high as 60% in different years, sometimes as low as 30%, but much higher than those adults where we're seeing only 5% mortality. So it changes. Yeah, if bears are in better condition, they can have more, but they only have them every 3 years because they keep cubs with them.
This is a really, I guess I always like to highlight this in conversations about sort of babies passing away, is that humans are really unique in that we do have a really high, success rate of keeping kids alive for a very long time because we have more parental investment than pretty much anything in the world. And so in most animals, you'll have more babies than usually survive. And so I'm glad we get a chance to talk about that today. So thanks, Ms. Paulson, for the question. Guys, time flies and you're having fun. We're at the 40-minute mark already. I'm going to head to our three final questions here. Ms. Mass's class, grade 7th, if you guys want to come in next, and then we'll go to North Hollywood right after that. Hey, guys.
So my question is, how far do polar bears travel a day to hunt?
Ooh, Louise.
So it really depends on the polar bear. They're pretty individual. They all have different areas they like to cover. Some bears can cover up to 100 kilometers a day to get to their preferred hunting areas. Some bears might just use the same area throughout the year and they could have much smaller home ranges. So it really depends on the bear. Some of them are travelers and some of them just like to stay in the same area.
I'm in an 8th-floor apartment and I can literally see the grocery store that I walk to every day to get food. It's like right across the street, and I feel very spoiled about that when there's 100-kilometer walking to go hunt a seal. Chris Hadfield School, come on in, and then we'll go to Mr. Pettix to wrap up in a second. Hi, guys, and Milton. Hey.
My question is, how long does a polar bear live?
Yes, our most common question on YouTube as well. Great question.
Yeah, so they're actually very long-lived for a wild animal. We've had bears in the wild go up to 26 years. Males live a few years less on average, but yeah, mid-20s. Of course, they have to survive through those more challenging young years, but yeah, very long-lived potentially.
I picture our 9-year-olds going mid-20s. It's so old, and I'm like 29. I'm like, let's head to California for one last question, and then what we'll do is make sure that you guys have all the resources you need to learn more and keep the excitement on polar bears going when you're done this broadcast. So, California, come on in, guys.
Wave to the camera. Wave to the computer.
Hey, welcome in.
Got it?
My name's Augustine. What happens when they're getting hunted by the people?
Yeah, when polar bears are hunted, what happens?
So when polar bears are hunted, they're hunted. The regulations for hunting polar bears are really, really tight. So there's only a certain number of polar bears that can be hunted each year, and it's only Indigenous peoples are issued permits to hunt polar bears. In Canada, they can sell those permits and do what's called a sport hunt with an Indigenous guide. But that's very tightly regulated based on the population health of each population. So ensuring that the hunting is always carried out to reduce the impacts on the overall population health. So very tightly regulated since the 60s. So hunting is pretty well managed to ensure that polar bears are still able to keep on reproducing and maintain healthy population sizes.
You mentioned so many things there that I absolutely love in conservation presentations. But if you'd asked me 10 years ago, hunting, oh my God, it's terrible, it's the worst thing ever. And when well regulated, hunting can actually be a thing that perpetuates populations of animals. That's hard to say, and really has a big conservation success for a lot of creatures. So again, it needs to be regulated. It's very important that that's the case. But Indigenous communities, particularly around the globe, need to be allowed to continue those subsistence and traditional hunting methods. And that's something that we're starting to see in a lot of conservation stories around the globe. So, ladies, this has been so much fun. I know we could talk all day about polar bears. Sunniva, Hilda, I'll bring you back in as well. What I want to do is encourage all our classes. We have more questions that we could possibly answer in one broadcast. And so many things you can do to keep learning going. Number one, we talked about Polar Bears International. We've had Elisa McCall, our education manager, on many programs with us. She's amazing, too. If you want to follow up with their organization, learn from them. They're probably the best in the world at that. Norwegian Polar Institute, we did just last week. If you want to learn about the Hearts and the Ice expedition and their encounters with polar bears and so much more, get that book, that shameless spoiler. So go to heartsandtheice.com, check them out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, so much more. And again, a special thank you to the Canada Goose team for making this program possible and perpetuating the incredible work of Hearts in the Ice and beyond. It's been such a fun program today. Stephanie is there a last message collectively that we want to send to all our kids today from all across the continent about polar bears, why they're so important, and what they can do to help? Anything to wrap us up? Each of you?
Well, something that we always say, Jesse, which is super important, is it's so great that you host these calls, number one, because keeping all the people on the call engaged and understanding, then you protect what you love, and we all need to fall in love with our natural world almost over again, and because it does need our active protection. So thanks so much, Stephanie and Louise, for sharing what you love.
Absolutely. That's I think that's a great message that I'll add to, and that I think one of the most important things you could do is
knowledge change behavior. So stay in school, stay curious, and just maybe you can become citizen scientists or even scientists as Stephanie and Louise.
Fantastic. Thanks, ladies. And then Louise, continue on.
Sorry, Hilda. Just to add that I think to follow up, that sharing what you've learned today is really important. So talking about the things you've learned and maybe even being excited to learn a little bit more and add to some of the things we touched on. It's been really special being able to talk to everyone. So I'm very happy to be here.
Nice.
Yeah. I think the ladies covered it really, but Sunniva has an excellent point that we are part of the world. We do not live apart from it. It's easy to think that when you're in a city, but we depend on the world and it depends on us. So it is kind of our time to be there for the natural environment that supports us. And as Louise said, I think talking about it, learning about it, being engaged, falling in love with it is all so important.
You guys collectively have said my favorite message at the end of every one of our broadcasts. And truly, kids, when you're done, look up all those websites I sent you, watch that polar bear hunt video, and then leave. Don't leave your class. Stay with your teacher. When you can, get outdoors, go exploring, see what you can discover. It's so easy. No matter where you are in the world, there's nature near you. And by engaging with it in that way, you'll come to cherish it as much as the five of us do. So thank you all so much to all our classes. Stephanie and Louise, you're new to this, so what I want to do is what we end every broadcast with. I'm going to bring in all our live teachers to say a big thank you and farewell. So Mr. Margaret, Community T1, Chris Hatfield, Miss Maz's class, and Mr. Bennett. Here we go. Thank you guys so much.